Imagine stepping out of your front door, looking up at the sky, and instead of seeing, clouds or the sun, you just see this massive, disembodied stomach floating through the air.
Yeah, just drifting around up there.
Right. No face, no limbs, just a cavernous, empty belly drifting on the wind, endlessly searching for its next meal.
Which is a profoundly unsettling image for us today.
Oh, absolutely terrifying.
But the thing is, for early human societies, that wasn't like the pitch for some surreal horror movie. That was a very literal, very terrifying daily threat that they actually believed shared their environment.
And that bizarre image kind of perfectly sets up our entire mission for this deep dive, because today we are tracing how humanity's whole concept of evil evolved. We're going to look at how we went from fearing these invisible floating stomachs in the ancient sky all the way to constructing the highly sophisticated theological concept of the devil.
It is quite the journey.
It really is. And to do this, we are pulling from a single foundational piece of historical scholarship. It's the classic 1879 text called Demonology and Devil-Lore by Moncure Daniel Conway.
Yeah, it's this sweeping anthropological look at the history of the supernatural. But Conway's approach requires us to really mentally transport ourselves back to the absolute dawn of human consciousness.
Right, which means leaving our modern baggage at the door.
Exactly. You basically have to strip away everything modern theology has taught you about good and evil. Because early humans, they didn't look at the universe as this grand moral battleground.
So no cosmic war between angels and demons yet?
No.
Not at all.
They lived in a state of primitive pantheism. To them, the entire natural world was supernatural. I mean, the sun, the storm, the fire, they were immensely powerful forces, but there was no inherently good sun or evil storm.
They just existed.
Right. They were simply realities of the environment, and you just had to navigate them.
I feel like we tend to project our modern moral frameworks backward, We assume ancient people were constantly worrying about the state of their souls.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic mistake.
But Conway shows that before humanity could invent a devil that cared about your soul, we had to invent demons that cared about your body. And that brings us to the first major catalyst in the text, which is pain.
Right. Physical obstacles and bodily pain were the original templates for demons.
Yeah.
And the most pressing, unrelenting pain early humans faced wasn't a crisis of conscience. It was hunger.
Literal starvation.
Exactly. They looked around, they saw that food was scarce, they observed that predators were always hunting, and they logically concluded that there must be invisible, voracious spirits out there just consuming all the resources.
So they personified the physical sensation of starvation.
Yes. Which explains your floating stomach.
Ah, right, the stomach.
Yeah, that specific image belongs to an African tribe, the Karens. Their demon, Kefin, is literally conceptualized as a huge stomach floating through the air.
Because it's just pure consumption.
Exactly. It represents unadulterated consumption. And Conway points out that variations of this consumption demon appear all over the globe. Like, for instance, the South Sea Islanders feared this mistress of the netherworld named Miru.
Oh, wow, Miru. She is one of the more terrifying figures in this text.
She really is.
Because she isn't just an abstract concept of death. She is a highly organized butcher.
Yeah, she operates almost like a predatory chef. According to the mythology, she catches human souls in this massive net. But she doesn't just devour them immediately, which
would be too easy.
Right. She has her daughters intoxicate the captured souls with a drink made from the kava root.
Oh, so she marinates them first.
Basically, yeah. Once they are numb and sedated, she cooks them in a mighty subterranean oven. The mythology even notes that her cheeks are forever ruddy from the immense heat of her oven.
That is incredibly vivid, and it's entirely focused on the cycle of eating and being eaten. Even events on a cosmic scale were interpreted through this lens of a hungry stomach. Like, think about Rahu, the Hindu sun devourer. Because ancient people didn't have the astronomical science to calculate orbital mechanics or lunar phases.
No, of course not.
So when they saw a solar eclipse, when the sun literally seemed to be getting bitten out of the sky, their immediate conclusion was that a giant demon was eating it.
Right. And taking that worldview into account actually explains the mechanics behind one of the oldest human religious practices, which is sacrifice.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
Yeah, we often think of religious sacrifice today as a solemn act of spiritual purification, or like a plea for moral forgiveness.
Like cleansing your soul.
Exactly. But Conway argues that, initially, it was nothing of the sort. It was purely a practical strategy to feed these starving demons so they wouldn't feed on the humans.
It sounds a lot like a...
Like an extortion racket.
Yes, like an early mob extortion racket. Early humans were essentially paying protection money to the local mob boss.
Which in this case was the natural environment.
Right. You sacrifice a goat or burn a portion of your harvest as a payoff to the heavy just so your remaining crops wouldn't get burned down or your son swallowed permanently.
It's totally transactional.
Yeah.
And that dynamic of bargaining with a hostile environment lingered in human behavior for centuries, long after the original myths evolved.
Like that story about the baker.
Yes, Conway mentions this folk custom in Franconia involving local bakers. Right before putting a batch of biscuits into the oven, the baker would take half a dozen of them and throw them directly into the fire, and he'd say, "There, poor devil, those are for you."
Just giving the mob boss his cut off the top so the rest of the inventory doesn't mysteriously catch fire.
It's an insurance policy.
Literally.
Yeah.
But as human societies grew more complex, their primary threats kind of shifted, right?
Yeah, they were no longer just battling the harshness of nature. They were battling each other.
And this brings about a massive geopolitical shift in how the supernatural was categorized. Because if early humans were just bribing natural forces, we have to look at what happened when empires with entirely different sets of gods collided through war and conquest.
And this is the part of Conway's research that completely changes how you view mythology.
It really does.
Because when one empire conquered another, they didn't just burn the enemy's temples and tell the conquered citizens, your gods aren't real. That's actually a very hard psychological sell.
People don't want to hear that their lifelong beliefs are fake.
Exactly. It is much more effective to absorb the enemy's pantheon and humiliate it. Conway calls this the degradation of deities.
Degradation of deities. I love that term.
Yeah, the gods of the vanquished people were systematically demoted into the demons of the victors. The conquering priesthood would acknowledge that the old gods existed, sure, but they would rebrand them as malevolent spirits that the new, victorious supreme god had totally subdued.
And the history of language maps this warfare perfectly.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at the Sanskrit word deva, which meant the shining one or simply, God. When the rival Persian Zoroastrian faith gained prominence, they literally took their enemy's word for god Deva and turned it into the root word for ultimate evil.
Which eventually filters down into the word devil.
Right. It's a linguistic hostile takeover.
And you see this systematic degradation with specific figures throughout the ancient Middle East, too. Take the ancient deity Baal.
Okay, yeah.
He was originally worshipped across several cultures as a glorious sun god, and sometimes as a fly god who protected people from swarms. But when rival monotheistic faiths took over the region, they needed to neutralize his lingering popularity.
They couldn't just erase him from cultural memory?
No, so they tweaked his name through a mocking pun. Baal became Beelzebub, which translates to the dung god.
Wow. From the glorious sun to literal dung. I mean, that is an incredibly petty yet super effective political smear campaign.
Oh, very effective.
And this wasn't just isolated to the Middle East. It happened in Northern Europe, too.
Yeah, Norse mythology provides a perfect case study with Loki.
Oh, right. Everybody's favorite trickster.
Exactly. But in the oldest strata of the myths, Loki was not a villain. He was a vital fire god. He was considered so close to the chief god Odin that the two are actually said to have blended their blood together as brothers.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but as the culture shifted, and eventually as Christianity began to absorb Germanic traditions, Loki was aggressively degraded. The later myths depict him being tied up in a cave with the entrails of his own son, relegated to this writhing demon whose agonizing spasms cause earthquakes.
And there is a specific physical trait that Conway points out here, which acts like a fingerprint for these demoted gods, right?
Yeah.
Lameness.
Yes. A surprising number of demons and fallen figures have damaged legs or cloven hooves.
Which makes sense when you think about it metaphorically.
The physical impairment is a metaphor for their geopolitical fall. Hephaestus, the Greek smith god, is hurled from Mount Olympus and becomes lame. Wayland the Smith in Teutonic legend suffers a similar fate.
Even the cloven hoof of the later Christian devil.
Exactly. It's a surviving symbol of this specific degradation. Their bodies are depicted as broken because they were violently cast down from their previous heavenly status by a newer, more powerful religious regime.
But hold on, I want to push back on this a bit. If the priests of a conquering religion wanted people to stop worshiping the old gods, why paint them as physically hideous and bestial?
What do you mean?
Well, if the goal of a demon is to tempt you into sin, wouldn't it need to be attractive? Like, a grotesque gargoyle on a cathedral doesn't tempt me. It just makes me want to run away.
That's a great point, but the temptation aspect actually comes much later in history.
Oh, okay.
At this stage, those old gods already were beautiful and comforting to the common people. Think about spirits of the hearth, or agricultural goddesses who were seen as mother figures.
People loved them.
Right. So the priests of the new religions intentionally commissioned hideous art to artificially associate those comforting figures with horror. They were executing an anti-marketing campaign against the peasants' lingering affection for their old deities.
Kind of like what happened to Frigga.
Yes, perfect example.
She was a beloved earth goddess, sometimes even called Mother Rose. She was associated with spinning and childbirth and comfort.
But to break her hold on the population, the new religious authorities couldn't just say she didn't exist. So they systematically painted her as a haggard, frightening witch riding a broomstick.
That is so sad.
It is. The ugliness of the demons wasn't a reflection of their true nature. It was a deliberate strategy to scare the populace away from seeking out the old, familiar comforts.
Okay, so we've covered demons as natural forces of hunger and demons as the humiliated gods of conquered neighbors. But none of these entities are the devil.
No, they aren't.
And this is where Conway draws a massive line in the sand.
It is arguably the most important distinction in the text. A demon is natural. It inflicts pain out of necessity, like a hungry wolf eating livestock to survive, or it operates as a political rival.
Right.
But a devil is theological. A devil loves evil for its own sake. Rather than just inflicting physical pain or representing an opposing tribe, a devil actually seeks to corrupt the moral fabric of humanity.
And as we unpack Conway's historical thesis here, I think it's really important to note that we're looking at this purely through an anthropological lens.
Yes, absolutely.
We aren't taking a stance on the religious validity of any of this. We're just looking at how human societies engineered these philosophical frameworks over centuries to solve massive intellectual problems.
Right, this is history and sociology.
Exactly. And the biggest intellectual problem humanity ever faced was the problem of evil.
Oh, without a doubt. When a society develops the concept of a single, supreme, all-powerful, and all-loving deity, they immediately run into a logical wall.
Because bad things still happen.
Right. If this supreme deity is entirely good and controls everything, how do you explain disease? Or famine? Or the suffering of innocent people? If you blame it on the supreme deity, that deity suddenly looks cruel or incompetent.
You need a scapegoat. You need a way to completely absolve the supreme deity of the responsibility for earthly suffering.
And the Persian Zoroastrian faith provides one of the earliest clear definitions of this solution with the figure of Ahriman.
Ahriman.
Yeah, he is what Conway calls the divine devil. Ahriman is positioned as a twin spirit to the good god Ormuzd. This creates a perfectly balanced cosmic battle of light versus darkness.
So it explains human suffering not as a punishment from a good god, but as collateral damage in a cosmic war against an equally powerful evil entity.
Exactly. And you can actually track this exact evolution occurring within the biblical texts as well. The concept of Satan shifts dramatically over time.
Right, because in older texts, like the Book of Job, Satan is not a red-horned fiend of absolute evil ruling over hell.
No, he is actually an official member of the divine court.
Which is wild to think about. He functions like a celestial public prosecutor. His specific job is to test the loyalty and resilience of humans on behalf of the supreme deity.
He is performing a sanctioned administrative role.
Yeah.
But as centuries passed, theology grew more complex. The need to definitively separate the supreme deity from the miseries of human existence became a lot more urgent. So Satan was slowly transformed from a court official into the ultimate adversary, taking on the characteristics of the theological devil that Conway describes.
It's basically cosmic corporate restructuring.
Exactly.
I mean, think about it. The supreme deity realizes the executive branch is getting terrible public relations for plagues and famines. So there's a reorganization of the management structure, and all the highly unpopular, painful decisions are outsourced to a newly created department head named Satan.
That is a great way to put it.
And whenever something goes wrong, the executive branch can just say, hey, don't look at us. That was the rogue guy down in the basement.
Framing it as corporate restructuring captures the sociological utility of the concept perfectly. The devil was a necessary invention to protect the moral purity of the newly conceptualized supreme deities.
Right.
But once the devil becomes this theological figure of moral corruption, it completely alters the way everyday people experience the supernatural. The battlefield fundamentally shifts.
Because humanity was simultaneously gaining control over the physical environment We stopped looking at the sky for threats and started looking inward.
Exactly. As mankind gained physical control over nature, inventing better tools, mastering fire, building sturdy architecture, and developing reliable agriculture, the terrifying external demons of nature started to shrink.
We weren't as helpless anymore.
Right. They became manageable. The giant, terrifying fire fiend Loki of the ancient world gradually turns into a tricky, manageable little goblin in later folklore.
Oh, that makes sense.
But human anxiety doesn't just disappear. As those physical fears faded, moral and psychological fears rushed in to fill the vacuum.
And the evolution of language illustrates this psychological shift beautifully. Conway highlights this ancient Greek root word, emafh, which meant to throttle or to choke.
Yeah, and in Greek, that root evolves into the word ache, which means an adder or a serpent. It refers to the literal physical snake in the grass that throttles its prey.
An external bodily threat.
Exactly. But when you trace that exact same root word over to Sanskrit, it evolves into the word amhas, which translates to sin.
The physical throttler literally became the spiritual throttler.
It is a stunning piece of linguistic archaeology. The snake attacking your body was transformed into the guilt and corruption attacking your conscience.
The mechanism of fear totally moves from the outside world to the internal world.
It does. And yet for centuries, people still struggled to really separate the physical from the moral. Even during the Renaissance, you see this blending.
Like with Martin Luther.
Yes. Martin Luther, the great religious reformer, firmly believed that devils lived in damp, black clouds. And he said they carried what he described as boxes full of poison to spread diseases.
Which is fascinating, because he was basically demonizing miasma. He didn't have the scientific vocabulary for bacteria or airborne viruses yet.
No, so pretty good.
So his brain rationalized invisible physical threats by assigning them moral agency. An invisible sickness just had to be the work of literal imps carrying poison boxes.
The invisible threats of the natural world were moralized. And this internalization of evil, this blending of physical threat and moral corruption, gives us some of the most enduring pop culture monsters we still fear today, like the werewolf and the vampire.
Because those creatures aren't just scary animals in the woods, they are human beings.
Exactly. They represent the nocturnal, animalistic urges that remain inside the human psyche. Lust, selfishness, unrestrained cruelty.
The things we hide during the day.
Right. As society became more civilized and demanded strict moral codes, people feared their own repressed desires. Those fears were personified as ordinary humans who lose their moral compass and literally transform into predatory beasts when the sun goes down.
It's just such a fascinating psychological irony. So, as a species, we spent millennia taming the literal wolves howling outside our caves, only to realize we had to invent werewolves to explain the terrifying, untamed animal urges still lurking inside our own minds.
That is the tragic irony of human progress.
Yeah.
The better we got at fighting the monsters outside, the more we were forced to confront the reality that the monsters were actually inside us all along.
Wow.
The devil wasn't just a scapegoat for God anymore. The devil became a mirror for humanity's own capacity for cruelty.
Man, that is a massive, epic trajectory. I mean, we started with early human tribes sacrificing food to a giant floating stomach because they were just trying to navigate the visceral terror of starvation.
Yeah, keeping the physical demons fed.
And then we watched rival empires conquer each other, turning the losers' sacred gods into humiliated dung deities and lame goblins.
The geopolitical smear campaigns.
Right. And finally, we saw the invention of the theological devil, a brilliant philosophical framework designed to solve the problem of earthly suffering, which ultimately forced us to internalize our fears as moral corruption.
When you look at the historical record through Conway's lens, it becomes incredibly clear that understanding the history of demons and devils is simply understanding the history of human psychology.
They're completely intertwined.
They really are. Every monster we have ever conjured up in our myths, our religions, and our folklore is just a historical footprint. It is a fossilized record of an obstacle, whether it was a physical threat like hunger, a geopolitical rival, or a psychological crisis that humanity was actively trying to overcome at that specific moment in time.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on today. Because if early humans invented the hunger demon to explain the physical pain of starvation, and medieval society invented the theological devil to explain the philosophical pain of moral corruption, what new invisible demons is our modern, hyper-connected society busy inventing right now?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. What monsters are we conjuring to explain the chaos, the isolation, and the anxieties of the digital age? are our new demons floating somewhere in the cloud? Something for you to think about as you go about your week. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.